Welcome, Endurance Drive community. Today we have a very special episode and format. We are talking about our Beast of the East, our Tour de France, our Challenge Roth, our historic triathlon monument, and that is Ironman Lake Placid. And not only are we going to break down the entire course for you, we're going to do that with multiple World Championship qualifiers, Coach Katie and Coach Kevin. How well do they know this course? Coach Katie qualified for Kona at Lake Placid in her first Ironman. Off the bike, she was over 40 minutes down on first place in her age group. Knowing she needed to finish first in her age group to secure a Kona spot, she paired her course knowledge and superior fitness and drive to catch first place at mile 18. Boom! Finishing strong and well ahead of everyone in her age group, she punched her ticket to Kona. To this, Coach Kevin said, "Hold my beer." Under the tutelage of Coach Katie, the following year, he pulled off the unthinkable, riding the worst-fitting road bike in his first ever triathlon. Yes, his first triathlon. Kevin used his big fitness, smart racing, and deep local knowledge of the course to punch his ticket to the big show in Kona. And then in 2023, both Katie and Kevin qualified again at Lake Placid, making them 2 for 2 on this course, which is all to say, the course experts are in the house today. Stay tuned for detailed course descriptions and, more importantly, how you can use their same race tactics and strategies to have your best Ironman Lake Placid race. And even if you're not racing Ironman Lake Placid, we will cover many training principles, tactics, and strategies you can use in any long or even short distance triathlon. Plus, you'll get to hear some really cool race stories. So stick around. This episode is for everyone. So, that's a long way to say, let's welcome our course and triathlon race experts, Coach Katie and Coach Kevin.
Woo, thanks so much, Tim. It is so exciting to be here in a little bit more of an interview capacity than usual, and just so excited to talk about my favorite race ever.
Yeah, no, it's excited to be back. Like I said, I wish we were in New Hampshire recording this, but we'll make Zoom do.
Great. Well, so as we always do, before we even get to Ironman Lake Placid, let's start with our coaching and training insights. Katie, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And I had a couple insights come in the last couple weeks I'm really excited to share. And the first one happened in the middle of a really grueling race sim. So for those that don't know, I'm getting ready for CETA Summit. That's my A race in July. It's sort of a triathlon adventure race. And I was doing a race sim a couple weeks ago on one of the first really, really hot days that we've had this season. And honestly, it was a little bit of a tough day. The humidity was really high. I was out there by myself. And I noticed that within the first 5 minutes of this race sim, I could tell that my heart rate was a little bit up. And I started to write the narrative of the whole race sim and say like, all right, this is not going well. This is not going to go well. It's this whole negative narrative. And I pulled out this new mantra that I think could be useful for some people to think about applying to their own training, which is the idea of reserving judgment. So it's really, really easy when you're having a tough day to jump right in and say like, all right, this is it. It's over. It's going to be really, really bad. You could imagine that happening, for example, in a swim. If you have a bad swim in a triathlon, it's really easy to just write a narrative where the whole day is bad. But I just kept trying to tell myself, reserve judgment, just wait, just see how you feel in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, but don't write the narrative right now. And I think that mantra ended up working really well for me because a lot of people talk about really positive self-talk, but personally, that's kind of hard for me to do when I'm having a really tough day. Like it feels like this cynical mindset comes in where if I'm like, woohoo, you're awesome, everything's amazing, I'm like, that's total bullshit. But if I just say something like reserve judgment, it gives me a little bit more space to just say like, okay, this is a neutral statement, but I'm not going to judge it right now. And I did make it through the race sim, and I think that was really helpful. So definitely reserve judgment when you're having a tough day out there.
Yeah, I love this one. I've struggled with this one so much. Same thing to get in, first 5 minutes in the race and go, oh my gosh, like this is the story of how I didn't do well today. So one thing I've learned recently is that, humans have this sort of negative bias and we tend to focus on the negative most. And I think probably the reason why is that that's what kept us alive for thousands and thousands of years. So we are all sitting here today because our relatives probably had this negative bias, which kept them alive. But the negative bias serves us well as a species, I guess, but doesn't serve us well on race day. So I'm going to steal this one and use reserve judgment.
Awesome. Next insight for me, also related to hot weather. As a coach, I've had a lot of athletes recently who have come to me and talked about how they're sometimes struggling to stay cool and to fuel and to hydrate during race sims on really hot days. And one of the reasons why it's hard to do that is because in most race sims, you don't actually have the luxury of having an aid station every mile, for example, on the run to be able to cool off and do what you need to do. So people are just kind of overheating and not getting that same stimulus because maybe they go out for 6 miles off the bike, they have a little soft flask, it's hot by the time they even get back, and so they can't stay cool. And so I've thought about, possibilities for doing a better job simulating what the race is going to be like. And one thing that you could consider doing is set up an aid station in your car and actually just do loops from there. So think about having a cooler, fill it with ice, fill it with water, fill it with all the things that you would have in a regular aid station. And then instead of saying I'm going to run 6 miles out, say I'm going to run 1 mile loops. I'm going to come back here every time, because then you can actually see what it's like to have that consistent fueling and hydration and ice access. And at the end of the day, when we're doing race sims, we're trying to get as close as possible to what race day is going to be like. So I wouldn't actually handicap yourself by not giving yourself access to these things. And this is something actually, Kevin, that I think you've done quite a bit. I'm a little bit stealing it from you, having that cooler in the car.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. I mean, especially if the course or wherever your training lays out for it. You could just park your car, cooler in there, leave a bunch of ice, stop halfway, throw the ice on you, refill your bottles. It also breaks up the ride too. If you're out there for 80 miles, it's like, all right, I'll take a 40-mile break. Give me a little mental break too.
Definitely. I love that. So yeah, definitely think about that aid station in the car. Last insight for me. So we talk a lot about data that's useful on this podcast. And I think at a certain point, we kind of all have to figure out what data metrics are the most useful to us. But one that I've been thinking about a lot recently is sometimes you go out and you're like, I feel kind of tired. I don't know if I feel good. I don't know if I feel bad. Just something feels hard to put your finger on. And so one metric that I've actually been using a lot recently is the difference between my average heart rate and my normalized power for a given ride, for example. This is most relevant to biking. And what I've noticed with just a lot of experience kind of trying to nail that race pace is if I feel good on a long race pace type ride, I usually see, for me personally, roughly like a 30 to 35 difference between my normalized power and my heart rate. So an example would be 135 heart rate for a 3-hour ride. That's kind of at my race effort. And like 170 normalized power is a pretty good example of this. Now, keep in mind that that's going to be different for everybody because power is based on a lot of different factors, including just like body size and weight. But I think it's cool to be able to look at the difference between those numbers and know that it should be pretty consistent. And so for me, if I'm having a bad day or something's off or I'm feeling sick, I might see a shrinking gap. I might see 145 heart rate for that exact same power. And so for me, again, this is just like a pretty personal metric, but if you can start looking at these differences and these general metrics, that can help you objectively evaluate where you're at. And for me, for example, I'm recovering. I had a GI bug earlier in the week and I was seeing 125 heart rate and 137 normalized power. That's about a 10 gap, and that's not so good. And that was sort of validating in the sense that, yeah, this is not me reacting normally. I find that this metric for me tracks pretty well with things like resting heart rate, HRV, etc. So it's just getting creative with different metrics that are useful to you. But if this is useful to anyone else, start paying attention to those deltas. I think that that's pretty meaningful.
Yeah, right on. I think that's great. Yeah. And recognizing too, like on race day, of course, your heart rate's going to be up. But again, that delta could be sort of similar to as well. So like as you say, like this and like the example you used in one of the last episodes about the road bike versus the aero bike and heart rate and normalized power. This is a great example. So like you said, this is good data, right? So pay attention to this. Yes.
Definitely. Jamie, you want to take us next for insights?
Sure. Yeah. So this one's probably a little bit related to my injury, which when this comes out about 6 weeks ago, I broke my femur in a couple of places on a freak TT bike accident. But anyway, my first insight today is, if you need to take some time off from your sport because of injury or work or family, you will be fine. Like I am fine. Sometimes it's scary, I know for me to imagine life without sport as a centerpiece for identity and physical and mental health. But, for all of us, a break will inevitably happen for some reason. So if that happens, you can still focus on eating well, plenty of sleep, trying to get your 10,000 steps, maybe lifting some weights. And, I think all that will provide a healthy bridge to when you can resume your sporting life.
I love that, Jim. And I think this relates to actually the episode that came out last week on mental health and endurance sports, the idea that sometimes even a break can help you really tap into the other tools, and you don't want your sport to be the only tool that helps sustain your mental health. So I love here that, you can focus on the things that you can do, but then pulling on other things to just keep you staying afloat is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I like that, Jim. I think sometimes we forget that we're doing this for passion and for fun. So everyone else has their life going on. So if you got to focus on pulling the levers a little bit, it's completely normal. We're not on the challenge tour going for the gold medals sometimes.
Exactly. We always say keep the recreation and recreational athletes. So
Yeah, person first.
right. And my second one here is we have a lot of athletes who are racing now, but they're also doing, the week 8 or week 4 race simulations. And so I just wanted to kind of talk through a little bit through that. So by this time, when you get to these, these race sims, you're pretty fit. And so the way to sort of think about the week is that Monday through Friday sessions are really these supporting workouts, and they're not always like these critical workouts. And then the weekends, and particularly that week 8 and week 4 race sims, are really important and to closely approximate race day demands. So these weekends will provide the most important stimulus that will allow you to adapt to race day conditions. So the number one thing you can do entering those weekends or race day is showing up mentally and physically fresh. So if this means taking an extra day off, scaling back some of the Monday through Friday workouts, go for it, right? We want to bring our best on those days to be sure we make space in your busy life to ensure that that's the case.
Yeah, I think this is great advice. And I think if you find that life is getting in the way of weekday workouts, you actually could just focus on weekends and you would still be okay. It changes so much compared to that general prep phase where it's like, yeah, we kind of spread load throughout the week because you're never going to do a 6-hour ride in January. But now if you just do a little bit of base stuff during the week and then smash every weekend, I think you'd be well prepared to do an Ironman.
Kevin, what do you have for coaching and insights?
I'm going to, piggyback, I guess, a little off yours, and also just, like I said, a lot of people are doing race sims, or even if it's a marathon, people have longer runs. So taking a little bit of time, like either Thursday or Friday, to kind of reverse plan your weekend, if you're going to be traveling, or even if you're home base, like plan your route out, plan where your fueling station's going to be. Can I stop at this gas station? Last year during Iron Prep, that Friday, I would go on Google Maps, see where I can stop, see what mileage it is, look at Strava maps, stuff like that. So reverse plan your big session, because you don't want to be out there and say, where am I going? Where am I stopping? I think that's super helpful to just have a plan of what your race in or what your long run is going to be like, essentially.
Yeah, that's great advice. I like the reverse engineering of it all. I always tell people, like, it's easier actually on race day because you don't have to figure out where to stop, and you have people up there. Yeah. Exactly right. So, okay, have we arrived at our main content?
We've arrived in Lake Placid.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, great. Katie, you want to give us a little background on why are we so interested in Ironman Lake Placid?
Yeah. Well, this is a very, very special race for the Endurance Drive. So if you don't know, the Endurance Drive, we are based in the Upper Valley. That's where we got started. Kevin's in New York. I'm in Boston right now, but we are sort of in this New England area. And I would say that Ironman Lake Placid really is the New England Ironman. There are not very many Ironman races in this part of the country. There used to be Ironman Mont Tremblant, but I'm pretty sure they don't even have the full there anymore. And so there aren't that many opportunities to be able to do a race within driving distance that's going to hit the climate that you can train for as a New England-based athlete. So that, I think, was why we decided to do Ironman Lake Placid as our first Ironman a long time ago. And Kevin, I'll let you eventually talk about, your history with the area as well. But since then, we've spectated or been to this race probably 4, 5, 6 times. We know it inside and out. And as Jim said, we got pretty lucky, but also put the work in for 2 for 2 Placid to Kona. And we're just excited, I think, to share how special it's been.
Yeah, I grew up, my family's had a place here since 2002. So I grew up, seeing the Ironman and thinking what crazy bunch of people those are. So to finally be able to do it and kind of make it, a part of what we've done as a team is also special. It's also a special race because it's a vacation for families. They come for the week, people go hiking, their kids are running around. It's a very special town, and they just got another contract extension for it, which was kind of a surprise, but we'll take it. So maybe in the next 3 years, we might be out there again doing it.
And the other thing, too, is about Lake Placid is that we get to go see the site of what you said, it's a 1932 and 80 Olympics?
Yeah, 32 winter and 1980 Olympics. And obviously the 1981 is known for the big hockey win of the Miracle on Ice when we beat the Soviet Union after losing 10-1 to them in an exhibition game months before. So that's always special. People always go to the Herb Brooks Arena and they see the snow out in the front of it, even in the summer. So it's a special town.
Yeah, I'll add to that one of the rules in the packet is that you have to watch the movie Miracle the night before you do Lake Placid. This is the Endurance Drive packet, not the real packet, but I've done that before every race, and it's always like, okay, we can do this. Let's ask for a miracle, and it'll probably happen.
We keep emailing the race director every year going, you just need to be in the race guide. Where is it missing?
Even the feel, though, I'm sure you guys can, when you drive in there on Wednesday, Thursday, you just kind of like feel the race energy from the start. I don't know. It's a special place for it.
Yeah, and this is probably something we'll come back to, but the energy of this race in general, the spectators, the volunteers, it's as good. I'm sure, Kevin, you probably agree. It's as great as the World Championships. It's such a special
100%.
energy.
So let's get to the course just in general. So Ironman Lake Placid is known for its incredible swim, hilly but beautiful bike course, and usually it's hot and humid to run. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little general description of each section, and more importantly, how you can approach racing this section of the course with our course experts here. And again, we're talking specifically about Ironman Lake Placid here, but you should do this for any sort of long distance race, whether it's half Ironman or Ironman, is start to break down each section of the bike and run course and have some sort of strategy around how, what the weather's going to be like, what the terrain's going to be like, how you're going to race that. So we're going to kind of go through that and break down the course, how we think about the segments. But I guess we should start with race morning. Kevin, is there any special considerations race morning, like parking, shuttles, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of people do stay like in those downtown hotels, but they get pretty crowded. So a lot of Airbnbs outside of town. So if you can get dropped off right at the top of the hill or the bottom of the hill near the Anthem Inn, great. Anytime you can get close to it, good. But if not, they do shuttles from where the horse grounds is and where the fire department is. So you'll see that in the race packet. They will do shuttles if you need to park and then go in on that shuttle. So if you can get dropped off, please do it. If not, you just hop on the shuttle. It just makes it a little bit more complicated after.
How about, okay, so the swim. Here we go. This is the best place to swim in the world. And so I have 3 questions for each of you. Katie, on the swim, the first one is, when should we be up at the lake from transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think what's tricky with a lot of these swims is it gets really, really crowded towards the front with people lining up. So you do want to get over there pretty early just so you can get a good spot lining up. And if I remember correctly, you have some stuff to do in the morning. You're in the transition area. You're dropping off your nutrition. Then you drop off run special needs. It's a little bit of walking kind of all around Mirror Lake Drive. And so save yourself a lot of extra time. And I think I plan to be kind of in my corral ready to start at least 40 minutes before the gun was going to go off. I think there is an opportunity to kind of get in the water a little bit if you want to. But my goal was just get everything done and then go find my spot, be holding a snack, be holding water that I could just get rid of. And it was nice because actually my family, you, Jim, everybody could be pretty close to me during that time. I had my wetsuit kind of halfway up, not totally zipped, ready to go. But yeah, leave yourself a lot of time or else you're going to be stuck at the very back of that pack and you don't want to have to fight through people just to get a good seating spot.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of seating, how do you think about seating yourself in the swim, this race, or really any other race?
Yeah, so I think this question actually applies to really any half Ironman or Ironman. This is what I tell all of my athletes when they get to seed themselves. And you do in most 70.3s and full Ironmans, but everybody has a tendency to overestimate their swim time. So everyone thinks that they're going to swim probably 5 to 10 minutes faster than they actually do. So don't be the schmuck that actually seeds yourself in the right place. Instead, do that and forecast maybe one group ahead of what you actually think you'll do. So I'm pretty sure that for Lake Placid, there's like a sub 1 hour group, a 1 hour to 110, 110 to 120, 120 plus, et cetera. Usually it goes in these 20 or 10 minute increments. And I'm pretty sure I seeded very close to the like 1 hour mark, even though I expected to swim maybe a 105 to 110 because I knew that everyone was going to overestimate it. And that actually ends up being pretty close to the front. So I think Kevin, you and I lined up together both times up there. And I believe my swim was somewhere in that range as well.
And the beautiful part about the swim is there is this thing called the cable. Is that right?
Yeah, the cable is magic. So this is different from pretty much any other Ironman swim that I'm aware of. And I'm not sure why it's the case. I'm not sure how it's even allowed. But in Mirror Lake, which is the venue for the swim, it's a really beautiful lake. And actually, you should be aware that it's not Lake Placid that you swim in. Lake Placid is this really big lake that's next to Mirror Lake. Mirror Lake is this smaller, more like a pond, but beautiful. And basically on the course, there's this white cable that stretches underneath the water. And it just looks like this glowing beacon of light. And you get in the water and it's shaped like a big rectangle and all the buoys are attached to it. And if you just stay on the cable the entire time, you will swim the exact course to a T, just like a lane line. And you don't even really need to sight because it's marking the course exactly. Now, what's really funny about this race is the cable exists. Everybody knows that it exists. And yet lots of people will swim like 200 yards away from the cable. Maybe they're trying to avoid the crowd, but there's so many of those people that it usually is just as crowded way off. And they'll end up swimming an Ironman with like 4,600 yards. So my advice would be stay on the cable. Yes, it's going to be a little bit congested, but there's a really nice jet stream there because most people are on the cable. And you'll find that it's just getting in like an express lane on a highway. You just stay right there and you keep going. be aware that you can, if you don't sight a little bit, you will probably crash into the buoys, but it doesn't really hurt. It's just like a little bit surprising. So I'll still sight every so often just so I have a good idea of where the buoys are going to be and maybe try to avoid them. But yeah, swim right on that cable. And it's a 2-loop course. So you'll do that one rectangle, get out of the water, and then do your second loop.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, Kevin, so now we're in the water. How do we think about pacing each one of those loops?
Yeah, especially with how you seed yourself. The first loop is actually pretty pleasant. Like I remember last year, I was able to get in a rhythm and not be punched and kicked by everyone. So the first loop is good. It's important not to go out, obviously, too fast. You make a loop at the top. Like Katie said, keep your eye. I mean, the buoys are yellow and red, so they're not easy to miss. So I would say stay conservative on the first loop. And then the second loop can definitely be more crowded. You have now all 2,000 swimmers. It's a fully sold out race every year. So you have every swimmer in the water at this time. So the second loop for both years have always been a little bit slower just because there's more people. You're kind of bobbing and weaving, hitting people. People are grabbing your feet. So just be a little bit more patient on the second loop. No, it's okay. Don't, stretch yourself out. If you're saying, oh my God, I'm a little bit slower, just take it easy, get out of the water and get to T1.
Yeah, so speaking of that, so I think one of the most exciting places in sports is to be at the exit of Lake Placid and be on the road watching everybody come out. And there's just thousands of people screaming and yelling. But we sort of have opinions about how do we exit the water and make our way to T1?
Yeah, so you pop out, you're on the sand. There's wetsuit strippers there, so they'll rip it off for you. And then I think it's important, you're going to be going downhill to where the oval is, where T1 is. Do not sprint. I saw 2 people fall on those blue carpets last year. They're slippery. So don't play hero ball and try to sprint to T1. Be conservative. Grab a water or Gatorade from the little table they have there. Make your way down to T1. And then I'll let Katie kind of talk about T1 a little bit on some strategy there.
Yeah, I can't agree more that you should resist the urge to sprint. And it's really hard because everyone is cheering and there's bells. But just tell yourself, nobody wins a triathlon in T1 or in the run into T1 or even during the swim. You have to conserve there. And it's a really easy place to just overcook it.
It's hard. You got people screaming, saying, let's go, the sun's rising. I mean, I'm still so surprised this did not win best swim course. It is, without a doubt, the best in Ironman.
It really is. So moving to T1, I guess we can talk a little bit about what you should be doing there and what it looks like. If you haven't raced an Ironman before, transition is a little bit more professional, I would say, than in a lot of other races where you actually enter a change tent. So if you wanted to make a full outfit change, some people do that. We don't really recommend that because tri-kits are fine for swim, bike, and run, but there are changing tents there. And you get your bags that have all the stuff that you need for going into the bike within that tent. So you go inside, open up your bag, and we've said this on previous episodes, but make sure to actually dump out your bag and make sure that you have everything because it's really easy to forget like some small item. I would say also during T1, this goes for any Ironman, but make sure to eat something while you're putting your shoes on, while you're putting your socks on. It's a good time to just get a bar down. And then I'd also say now's an okay time if you do want to stop at the port potties, you might as well do that because you will be out on the course for a long time starting there. And the biggest point here is really just to take your time. It's going to be a really long bike ride. And the difference between spending 6 minutes and 8 minutes in transition for an Ironman or 3 minutes and 5 minutes, it's not that big for your overall time. So again, move efficiently, but don't forget to do any of these important things and front load those calories and hydration because remember that you're going into T1 with a pretty big 4,200 yard swim deficit.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, so now we're on the bike. And so what we've done here, guys, is we've taken the bike course into sections. So we're going to talk through each section. So our first section, Kevin, is you're leaving Lake Placid and to the top of the Keene descent. What's the course look like? How are you approaching that section?
Yeah, so obviously you're bobbing and weaving out of town for a little bit, but once you kind of get to the recycle lane right there, you can be narrow for a little bit. And once you hit the ski jumps, they have this huge downhill. So it's tempting to kind of go full speed. And then from right there, it is a very, very steep hill to get up to kind of the outward bound towards the top of the Keene descent. So very, very big hill that they first start you off with. So you can blow up your race just on that hill right there if you're pushing watts that you shouldn't be, if your heart rate's, spiking up. So what we always try to do, especially during the race sims when we've done them up there, is just light on the pedals. Don't be a hero on that first hill right by the ski jumps. Just you're going to see people pushing, and they're going to be paying for it later. So keep it conservative on that first hill. Get to the top right near like where Craig Woods golf course is. And then from there, it's still a lot of punchy hills. You can be in aero for a decent amount of it, but there's never a stretch where you're like, all right, I'm going to go in aero. I don't have to focus. Like I can go straight away. There's always like these little punchy hills that you're going to be going at. And then there's also the out and back at the Mount Van Hovenberg bobsled area. There is an aid station there though, so it's a good time. You've got about probably 30 to 45 minutes where you should have taken a bottle down already. You can grab a new one. Kind of some windy turns in there, so same thing, be slow in there. Make your way out, and then there's a few more little punchy hills to get to the top of the Keen Descent right there. So I'd say for that first stretch, just be patient, I think is the best word. And then to the fun part, honestly.
Yeah, so now we get to what everybody must talk about is the Keen Descent, the big bad Keen Descent. Katie, what kind of advice, how should we approach this descent?
Well, I thought Kevin's advice was really great for thinking about that first section. And one thing I'll add is that once you hit the Keen Descent, you're not going to be able to take your hands off the bike. You're not going to be hydrating. You're not going to be fueling. So that's why you want to front load it in that first part of the bike. And again, if you're going easy enough that you can fuel, that's actually a really good sign. You're holding back. And I actually also try to front load calories there because I know that my heart rate will drop on the Keen Descent and I'll have a little bit more space to digest them. So again, like I might eat a full macro bar or something, which actually does have a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat. It's not just that pure carb strategy because I know I can digest it as I'm going down. So the Keen Descent is a really, really big descent. You'll probably drive up it depending on where you're coming from if you're coming into Lake Placid from a lot of the major areas. And I think you lose over 1,000 feet of elevation, which is something that doesn't appear in a lot of areas. Like if you're training in the Boston area, for example, or if you're coming from Florida, you cannot find places where you have a 1,000 foot descent. And so you want to be prepared for what that looks like. And a point that we'll come back to is if you have any opportunity to try that out weeks before, not the day before, but weeks before, traveling to Lake Placid and doing the Keen Descent is really powerful. It basically goes downhill flat a little bit and then moves into a really, really big downhill. And it is kind of some S-curves, twisty, turny. And if the roads have been wet, it can be slippery. So as far as descents go, it's probably not even on the safest side of things. And that's why you do want to be really comfortable with your bike handling and knowing how to deal with that. I would say you probably shouldn't be in aero unless you are a pro elite top level triathlete. Just because a gust of wind could come, you could have someone swerve near you, you're going to be going really fast. And at a certain point, like there's not a crazy aero benefit if you're just tucking and you're holding on and having access to the brakes as well. You shouldn't be braking on that descent though, because that does take away some level of control. Just be in a speed and pace that feels manageable for you. And think about not trying to pedal hard on this descent because you're going to be going so fast without pedaling at all that it's a nice way to just kind of bank free speed. Your average speed is going to change a lot from where you just started with the Placid climbing all the way down that descent. And especially at the bottom, when you hit those S curves, just be mindful of where you are and know that you're going to roll into the town of Keene and then you're going to need to take a left into the J section that we'll talk about next. But yeah, best advice here would be go out to Placid a couple weeks before. And if you can practice nothing else, practice the Keene descent because it is a big one. And at the very least, you should drive it if you don't have an opportunity to bike it before the day.
And one thing too is you guys, one lane of traffic is closed. Is that correct? So coming down Keen Descent, you're not negotiating cars at all, right?
Yes, which helps a lot.
And I think the other thing to be aware of when you hit those S curves, there's going to probably be a bunch of other racers. And so just being, like you said, Katie, be aware where you are in time and space because those people are going to be taking different lines probably on those S curves. So just being aware of like who's kind of beside you or who's maybe coming up from behind you.
Mm-hmm. And last point too is it often rains at Placid. Like there will be freak rainstorms. If it's wet, you need to be even more cautious because it can get super slippery. And a general tip is any type of wet roads, don't bike right on the yellow or white paint. That's extra slippery. So stay on the pavement.
So now we get to everybody's favorite section where you actually feel like a triathlete, and that is the Keen to J section. Kevin, what's that like?
Yeah, no, this is my favorite part by far. And when you're approaching this, it is a sharp left. They luckily have a crew there that's kind of saying, hey, slow, they'll have a trooper there, you know, showing you where to go. And then for this part, you'll be in aero. I think you should be in aero for 90% of this part, 95% of it. There's two punchy hills, but other than that, it's pretty flat. You usually have a tailwind here. So this is a time that you can kind of really open it up and show off that bike fitness that you've worked 8 months for. Another thing to note is that this is also a good time to get fuel in because after that descent, you really weren't, you know, touching your bottles or bars there. So it's a good time to get some fuel in, get an aero, and also break away from a pack too. I mean, you're going to have a lot of people, you know, jammed up from the descent and from the climb outside of Placid. So this is kind of a time where I think it gets a little bit more spread out. But it's beautiful. You know, you're passing like this big farm on the right once you get at the J a little bit. So it's a really good time to show off your bike fitness and enjoy bike as a triathlete. And it's kind of weird. They did switch up the bike course a little bit this year. I'm not sure why, but instead of taking that left to go right up to Wilmington, right near Upper J, you're actually going to continue on 9N right there. Very similar. There's nothing crazy about this little out and back. It's just for some reason what they had to do. So same thing. It's kind of the same thing as the old Blackbrook out and back. It's just down by the river essentially. So no material change in elevation gain or anything like that. Just a simple logistic change on their end.
And probably one thing you'll see, anytime you see a loop, this new loop like we have this year at Ironman Lake Placid, is you're going to face a headwind or a tailwind probably on one or either sections of this. So that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, but you still take that, you still are going to obviously have to make your way back to Wilmington. And I think that's one of the harder hills right there is when you take that left, or now it'll be a right back to go leaving Upper J. So very, very punchy hill.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I honestly feel like that's the hardest hill on the course. I know that
100%.
The Three Bears everybody knows about them. It's really hard coming back from Wilmington. We'll talk about that. But I really feel like this is a place where you could easily blow up your race on the first loop.
Yeah, it's just such a long hill. When you get done, it's still a gradual uphill. So like I said, just be very light on the pedals. You get a little fan spot up there once you get through the worst of it. So.
And I think one thing to keep in mind too with those J climbs is I remember seeing so many people staying in aero, but only going 8 to 10 miles per hour. For any race, if you're going less than 15 miles an hour, you shouldn't be in aero anymore. And I actually like to use that time as a great time to be sitting up, fueling. It's easier to grab a bar and get it down when you're sitting up. So just sit up for those J climbs because it's not worth it to be in aero. And most people will stay in aero because they just don't know.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've done a lot of work. We get back to Wilmington. Okay. Wilmington back to Lake Placid. I think it's about 12 miles or so, or like 115 miles. I can't tell which one it is. But Katie, how do we think about Wilmington back to Lake Placid?
Yeah, so that is a tough section. There's almost always a headwind, like we've been saying, and there's always some weird weather system. Either it's really hot or you get hit with a freak storm or, anything could happen out there. It's sort of the Wild West when you're getting back into town on that climb. So it starts out pretty gradually. It's one of those sort of 1 to 3% grade where you're just kind of undulating up, gaining elevation, but it's not really punchy. And then once you get towards the end, you go past Whiteface, which is a ski area, and you eventually get to the point where you're going to climb the Three Bears. So the Three Bears are these big hills, but keep in mind, they're not necessarily as bad as even the climb out of Lake Placid or the J climb. They're just called the Three Bears because they happen at the very, very end. And I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but it's a 2-loop course. So you're going to have to do them, and then you do them again at like mile 105, which is really, really tough. So here, just like we've been talking about, you want to make sure that you're keeping light on the pedals and just pulling out basically every mental toolbox tool that you have, because I find that can be a place where morale is the lowest. Everyone's really tired. Everyone doesn't want to be out there anymore, especially on the second loop. So just know that as soon as you hit the Three Bears, you are getting really close to town, which is exciting. And then in town, there's a little bit of kind of noodling around. You have to do some out and backs and loops around, but you're pretty much close to home, which I think mentally makes it a little bit easier. And then you'll roll into bike special needs after the first loop before going on the second loop.
And how do you guys utilize bike special needs?
Yeah, so for me, I will usually actually stop. As you roll in, there will be someone who has seen your number coming and they'll say, number 123, I've got your bag. You go right up to that volunteer and they're really, really helpful with basically just doing whatever you need them to do. So for me, that usually means switching out my 3 bottles with 3 bottles that are already in the bags. They have a whole bunch more carbs. I'll usually exchange wrappers for new bars. They have everything there in the bag. And I will stop the bike to do that, but I'm usually only have a foot down for maybe 30 seconds because the volunteers are so good. And then you can kind of just keep rolling through. So I would definitely encourage people to use bike special needs because it's great to be able to rely on your own hydration. And now that Ironman no longer has Gatorade Endurance, they have Mortal Hydration, which does not have a lot of carbs in it. If you can have carbs in your own bottles, I find that that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a whole different podcast to talk about their questionable decisions, but it's super important, special needs. And like you said, they're so efficient. Like I think I was stopped for a total of like 15 seconds last year. You're in and out, grab your bottles, go.
So as you said, it's a 2-loop course and we've just described the entire loop, but so we got to do it 2 times. Oh my gosh. So how should I be feeling when I get to bike special needs after the first loop? Should I be feeling like, oh, that was really hard? Or should I be feeling like that was pretty easy? What's the goal when you get there? How should I be feeling?
Yeah, I think you definitely feel like you're ready to do another one. I mean, Katie, we talked about this, is it doesn't feel like, oh my God, this is a huge bike until really you're on the other side of Wilmington. Now you're going back at like a mile 95 or 100. So I think the first stretch of the second loop is pretty fair. Like you have the descent to look forward to, you have the energy from the town that you just left, and then you hit obviously the flat stretch in J. Going Keene to J. So I think it's like pretty high morale for the first half of the second loop. And the second half definitely gets a little tough. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You know, you've been biking for 90 miles. You're heading into a headwind. You're heading into Wilmington stretch. So there's definitely a little bit of mental fighting there, but that's part of being, doing an Ironman.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that also speaks to the idea of practicing the course beforehand. If you do one loop, that should never feel like it totally destroyed you. So getting to the point where after that first loop, you're like, yeah, that wasn't easy, but it was kind of moderate. I think you're still in this like RPE 6 to 7 range where you haven't gone to the well yet, because you're absolutely going to go to the well in the second loop during that Wilmington point.
I think the question that comes up in everybody's mind, they get to mile 90 or so, and everybody's suffering, everybody hurts, and I think the question always comes up is, how am I going to run a marathon after this? I'm only at mile 90. So how do you guys mentally work through that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this does come down to some level of experience, but I would say in many Ironmans, I have been mentally the lowest during the bike, not even during the run, because just like you said, you're sitting there and you're like, I am hurting so badly right now, and I still have to run a marathon. And at least when you start the marathon, you have less than 26 miles left. Even if you have 25 miles left, it's no longer that full thing. But I think something that I've sort of reminded myself is, number one, you're actually going to feel a lot better when you start running, because it's partially just the biking, being on the bike, sitting on the saddle, your legs are in this crunched position. That's part of the reason it's so hard, not because you're just completely spent unless you've blown up and paced it incorrectly. And so I think just telling yourself like, hey, I'm actually going to feel better once I stop, that's something really, really powerful. And then we can actually go back to that mantra that I was talking about at the beginning of the day, like reserve judgment. We're not judging the run right now. Our only job is to get up the first of the 3 bears, and then get up the second, and then get up the third. Think about it 1 mile at a time, and then know that you are going to have a change of so many different stimuli at once you can start the run. Different shoes and different snacks and different crowd and completely different activity. So know that it will get a little bit better at the beginning of the run.
Kevin, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, you always feel kind of like alone out there in that and shred. So it's definitely like a little of a mental bear, and you're like, oh my God, I got to run. So, but if you're someone that looks forward to running, I think it's also like a little pep in your step, like, all right, just get me back to town. So I think there's a few different ways to go about it. One, just know that you're heading into kind of the coolest part of the race. You're going to head back into town, but also know that you kind of signed up for this. You had to run, it's crazy. You have to run a marathon after doing all that stuff. So just always tell yourself, you decided to do this. Like, you're lucky enough to be able to do this. I always say that kind of that 90 to 105 mile stretch on the bike.
Yeah. And for Kevin too, he gets to look forward to seeing 500 members of his family back in town yes. too. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So, okay. Yeah. So congratulations. You have finished the bike. You've hit T2. Katie, what are we doing in T2?
Yeah, so T2 is usually pretty quick. There's a little bit less to do than there is coming swim into bike. But again, you want to take your time. It's a great time to eat something, especially if you fell off your nutrition at all. If you notice like, oh, my last bottle is still half full, like get some of that down if you can. And I would say too, I remember this year I got off the bike and my legs felt like sticks. Like I really had no idea what was going on. I think I was just pretty stiff. And luckily that subsided pretty quickly in the time that it took me to get my shoes on. But that was a good sign that I needed to do some things in transition. So I stretched for a second. I think I took in some electrolytes. Just making some quick changes that will help you ease into that run is okay. And again, the difference between 6 minutes and 8 minutes or 3 minutes and 5 minutes is not that important for your overall race. Even if you are going for that Kona slot, you can make it up as long as you're making smart decisions that will let you run your best race. And the other thing I'll add here is it can usually be the middle of the day. If you're already sunburned or chafing, take some time to do a little bit of skincare in transition. I usually will grab Vaseline. They have that if you've got any chafing, because if you start the run and you're chafing, that's going to be the only thing you're going to think about for the next 26 miles. And it is really not fun. So it's worth just taking a couple seconds to do that. That'll make your run a lot more pleasant.
Yeah. Kevin, any advice, any tips or tricks that you have in T2?
Yeah, it's kind of people are always like, oh, I'm in a rush. Like they have the changing station for you. So make sure you change your socks. I try to always do that. Change your socks. tie your shoes tight because you don't want to stop mid-run to tie them. And just get down. They'll have some Gatorade there, but if you could also bring like your own little element or some type of electrolyte form because you just lost a bunch of fluids, but it's a little bit easier to take down while you're stationary, not running. So take down a little bit of fuel there and just cool your mental state down too. Like don't be in such a rush. You got a big next anywhere from 3.5 to 6 hours ahead of you.
And also in T2, is this where you list your bike for sale on Craigslist or eBay?
Grab your phone, put on Craigslist, never ride a TT bike again. It'll be all sticky, discounted price.
You never want to see it again.
Okay, that's all great advice. Okay, so we've come out of T2, and there's this big Lisa G's hill where Kevin's family is. Kevin, take us through that first part of the run.
Yeah, it's nice. They actually send you like 100 feet downhill to start, and then you obviously leave the oval, you head downhill, and then you pass Lisa G's, which is it's been my family's hangout spot. There's usually like anywhere from 25 to 50 people up there right on that rock wall. And that's also where there's this huge stretch of fans too. You have an aid station right above that. You got people screaming at you the whole way, getting you ready to go. So really cool stretch right there going downhill. And then they kind of just send you out of town. You hit a little uphill and then you're right near the recycling lane right there where you always are, Jim. And it's a good flat stretch, which will take you to where the ski jumps are. And then from there is when it gets fun.
So down Lisa G's hill, is it a full send or are you sort of tamping it back in that section?
No, there's no need to, absolutely send it down that hill. Your quads are going to be screaming from the bike anyway. So don't go out of control down that hill. I think take it a little bit smooth. And then on the up hills, going out towards recycle lane, same thing. You don't need to, rip that uphill. It's just, I always think in the first 3 to 4 miles should be like very conservative so you're not blowing up the rest of your 22 miles essentially.
Okay, Lisa G's to River Road.
Yeah, so this is kind of undulating like Kevin was saying. So after you hit that downhill, you are going to go up a little bit, but I find that to be a really nice section because it does have a lot of spectators, and we'll talk a little bit about this River Road section that does not have that same level of support. So here, just think about the fact that you're still close to town. You're finding your legs still. You're not really sure where things are going to be. But I find that in general, it's easy to bank some just solid Ironman pace miles in the beginning before things get super hard. And I would say this is a good time to really just prioritize good fueling and hydration, because the more you can front load it, the better it's going to be when inevitably you're like, I cannot take another gel. Like I will die if I take another gel. So the more that you can front load it in the beginning is really nice. And it's a really busy section. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to do. There's the ski jumps. There's the horse grounds. And again, there's Jim and Colleen at Recycle Lane as always. So it tends to be a pretty good section to be just locking into your Ironman race pace.
Yeah, we're mostly passionate about recycling here at the Endurance Drive. Not really Ironman.
Dumpling. Well, it used to be called Dumpling, so they changed it like a decade ago.
And then they'll change it to Jim and Colleen's Lane, yeah.
Right, exactly right. Thank God for Zero Sort. We bring all of our recycling over there every year. Okay, great. So we've arrived at River Road. Kevin, take us to River Road. Is this probably your favorite section, out and back?
Yeah, especially that first 3 miles. You start, you got the ski jumps behind you on the way out. You have this big open area. You got a huge farm and open field area on your right and left. There's a really good medical station there, and that guy is always blasting good tunes. So the first 3 miles on River Road is great. And then you'll head into the next section. It gets wooded. There's actually 2 little, punchy hills right there. I think that's when it gets like a little bit desolate out there, especially on the second loop. So definitely a little bit normal to lose like a little bit of steam right there mentally on the second. I mean, we're talking about both loops, but like I said, that first stretch is great, and then going on after that, you're running down the water right there, you're covered. The only thing that's nice about that is you are out of the sun right there. It's completely shaded for both sides, obviously. So that's honestly a huge positive.
And then we reverse it, Katie, back from River Road back up to Lisa G's. I hear there's a hill in there.
Yeah, so I feel like everyone spends so much time talking about the Lisa G's hill, which is a really, really big hill, but there is a second big hill on this course, and that's right by the ski jump. So you've gone down it at the end of just before you turn onto River Road, and then when you can come back, you turn right and have to go back up this big hill. And that one's tough because it's really big and there is not the same audience as there is for Lisa G's. But my advice for both of the hills is unless you can sustain a, controlled heart rate running up it, you should probably consider walking parts of these hills. even walking just the steepest section can really help avoid spiking that heart rate. And if you're going to have a situation where you're going to go well above threshold by continuing to run, then you should just be really careful about that. And again, something like that, a few steps walking is not going to change your overall time. Even if you're walking through aid stations to get the hydration and fuel that you need, that's okay. I always love pulling out the example of Chelsea Sodaro, who won the Ironman World Championships a couple years ago, and she walked through every single aid station because she was just managing her core temperature and getting the fuel and hydration that she needed. This is true for those hills as well. So you get up that hill, and then it's kind of nice rolling, continuing until you get back to Lisa G's. And I find that I like that section because you're starting to see people again, and you know that you're getting back closer to town. It's tough because if you're on the first loop, you know, you have to do that whole thing again. But just any type of return for me, I think, is mentally easier than going further and further away because it feels like you're getting closer and you're coming up on Recycle Lane, which is a really exciting place as well.
You see Jim. Yeah.
And then you get to see Kevin's family at Lisa G's again,
Yep.
right? Yeah. And Kevin, do you have any different advice besides Lisa G? So it always seems super hot there as well too. So is that another good reason to walk at that section?
Yeah, like I said, that you're losing your shade. You're completely baking at that point. And that hill, I mean, the Lisa G's hill is so hard. There's no ifs or buts about it. So you get like this nice little boost of morale from fans on the side right there. But I think that is also a very important hill to not blow it on. Like if you're not, Kona qualifying, just take a step back and maybe walk that stretch right there, because even after that hill, you take the left to go onto Main Street and it's still another uphill. Like it doesn't end. So that's a super, super hard stretch. And they actually make you do it twice, obviously, on the way back in and on the way back out. So
yeah, and that's a good point. So yeah, you take that left-hand turn. And so are you guys mostly walking up until you almost get to the oval, or how long do you continue sort of that fast walk up that hill up to the left-hand side?
I think I only actually walked the very steepest section of the Lisa G's hill. After you turn left, it kind of opens up a little bit and it's not as bad, but this is going to depend person to person. It really comes down to, can you stay under your threshold heart rate or really under like a high tempo zone? So if that means walking the entire hill to stay there, that's okay. If that means you can run the whole thing just slowly and shuffle, that's also okay. But for me, I think what that looked like was run the little bit, felt the heart rate go up, walked a little bit, hit the crest, turn left. It was more gradual and I was able to start running again.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And then the final section of the Outback on Mirror Lake Drive. Katie, what's that like?
Yeah, so that one is actually a pretty fun section. There's a little bit of rolling hills, but it's really beautiful. You're right next to the lake. That's also where Run Special Needs happen. So there's a lot of action there. You're usually seeing friends, family. The Endurance Drive tent is usually out there, which is also pretty exciting. And I think it's not as long of an out and back as the River Road out and back is. I think you only run maybe about 1.5 miles out and then come back. Yeah. And so that one's really nice. And again, on the first loop, morale is a little bit lower because, you have to leave town again. But at the end of that run, when, you're at mile 24, that's just a really exciting time to kind of soak it in and know that it trends uphill on the way out and downhill on the way back. So honestly, the last 1.5 miles or so of this run back in the oval is really amazing. I think that's the time to soak it in. I could probably do a whole podcast on stories from like how that has felt for me, just coming down that, seeing my family, knowing that I was running down a Kona ticket, something like that. It's a really, really powerful, but I would say try to enjoy it. Yeah, definitely try to enjoy it.
Yeah. So special for sure. And like it's a shorter out and back. And like you said, I think soaking that in, you got the lake on your right, you got town on your left. Like it was 85 degrees and I had the chills for that last mile right there. It's so special.
And there's probably no other, better finish area than Ironman Lake Placid in the oval.
Yeah, you get to go. It's almost like running around a track and the crowd is screaming so loud and people are lining the stands. I think it's a better feeling or as good of a feeling as Kona. So it's just so special there.
Yeah. Well, at this point, congratulations, guys. You have finished Ironman Lake Placid. It's really that easy, right?
It's just in an hour.
Yeah.
I'm getting the chills. I gotta, we gotta put it on the calendar.
You are an Ironman.
Yeah. Oh my God. And they got the flags on the oval right there. It's awesome.
One of the interesting things about this race course too, is particularly on the bike, is that you hit so many different climates on the way out and back. And can you guys speak a little bit about like what kind of things you've seen out there?
Yeah. I mean, we've basically seen every single climate that you can imagine between our race sims out there, where we've been in 40 degrees and driving rain and maybe a little bit of sleet in June. We've also seen 85 degrees and humid and hot. Wind is a given, so it's going to be windy no matter what. You should be prepared for that. And expect that even if it says there's only a 1% chance of rain, there will be rain. I got a total freak downpour thunderstorm, miles 95 to 110 of the bike this year. And honestly, I started laughing when it happened because I was like, yep, this is it. I think, Kevin, you were running when it happened. Yeah, it felt...
I was on the run. It felt great.
Yeah.
It's like taking it out.
But just be prepared for pretty much everything here. And you do want to especially be managing core temp with the heat. Of course, it's not the same as racing at Kona, but New England can get really, really hot and humid days. So you do want to be prepared for that. And we've even seen things like, I think your first, Kevin, was like bad air quality.
Oh, it was so hazy.
Yeah, anything can happen.
It's an absolute dart. You have no idea what it's going to be like. It could be 85 and humid. It could be 70 and rainy. It's just go with the ebb and flow of it. Be ready for anything.
And keep in mind, too, that the different towns can actually have different weather systems. So like Jay can be totally different from Wilmington, which is totally different from Placid. And so nothing will last forever, but be prepared for pretty much anything.
Yeah, one of the fun parts about spectating there is people come back into town, into Lake Placid, and they go, oh my God, the wind, and there was the thunder and lightning storm in Jay. And we're like, we've been putting suntan lotion on here. It's like, it's been so hot. What are you talking about? So,
Yeah.
One thing we also wanted to give our audience was we have a bunch of training considerations for Ironman Lake Placid. And when this comes out, you still have probably, 4 or 5 weeks until Lake Placid. So we wanted to go through a few of these workouts that we've found to be key to prepare. Katie, you want to jump in here and give us the first one?
Sure. So I think we've mentioned this a couple times so far, but a big piece of advice that goes for this race and any other Ironman is that one of the most valuable things you can do is travel to the course and get some race knowledge. This podcast is a great first start, but there's really no replacement for actually being on the Keen Descent or going up the Three Bears. And if you can plan out a race sim, it's one of the most valuable things you can do before race day. We've done that several times, kind of week 4 before going to Placid. We go out, we bike the course. Our race sim usually looks like Saturday, 1 loop swim, 2 loop bike, and then a 13-mile run on the course. And the next day we'll do the second loop of the swim and the second loop of the run. So you're getting the entire Ironman distance in 2 days. And I've found that doing that for any Ironman has just given me such a better idea of, okay, how am I going to feel at these different points? How do I need to pace this? And what mistakes did I make? So you can avoid making them on race day. So yeah, if you can get to Placid, do it. I would not do it inside of like 2 to 3 weeks beforehand. That's too close. Or you could do maybe an abbreviated version of the course if you went out that soon. But 4 to 5 weeks out would be an amazing time to get a really good practice in.
One thing we've mentioned in other podcasts is a lot of folks, social media is great because you get a lot of information about the race. But one thing we have noticed a lot is on some of these Facebook pages, folks will say, hey, it's 2 weeks out from race or 1 week out from the race. They announce, I'm going out for my biggest race day sim today. 1 week out, I'm going to get my last final touches. And we're like, no. Like after week 4, the hay is in the barn. Do not be the person out there riding 2 loops 1 week before the Ironman Lake Placid.
Unless you're Gustav or Christian.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about it is a cable swim. It's, open water sighting is not that critical. But Kevin, can you kind of speak to, thinking about swim volume and getting ready for an Ironman swim? Because it is a big swim.
Yeah. 4,000 yards is absolutely no joke. And it's different, obviously, in the lake than in the pool. It's less controlled. It's normal to be like a little bit uncomfortable at first. So that's why, starting now that it's warm out, I'm trying to schedule at least 1 open water swim a week for my triathletes right now. And usually it's on the weekend. That's the easiest time for folks to do that. So on a nice Sunday, I try to program anywhere from 30 to an hour swim, open water, just so people get comfortable. 1, getting your wetsuit on. It feels a lot different. 2, swimming where it's dark underneath you, you're not in the pool. And 3, obviously just getting comfortable, whether it's either at where your race is going to be or just in general. 4,000 yards is a lot. And luckily this course, I think, makes it a little bit easier with the cable, but you still need to be comfortable in the unknown waters there.
Okay, so most folks are on their TT bike on this course. And as we've mentioned, there's a lot of climbing. Everybody talks about the climbing. So are there things that we can do to sort of mitigate those climbs?
Yeah, so I think it's really, really important to be comfortable just climbing in general on your TT bike. And that means that when you're doing long training rides, you need to seek out hills. And if you live somewhere that's flat and you can't do that, simulating it on Zwift is a pretty good option. So you can hop on one of the Zwift courses that's like Mountain Route or Alp to Zwift, anything like that, and practice that low cadence and know that you're going to be sitting up for some of that. I think this is not necessarily a course that caters to someone who's really good at just pushing perfect, consistent power in aero the entire time. it more caters to someone who can climb really, really well on their TT bike. So for us, that meant doing almost all of our practice rides, luckily in the Upper Valley, and aiming for, 6,000, 7,000 feet of elevation on 6-hour rides, which is a ton of climbing. But I think that was a huge advantage for us, not even because it made us stronger on the uphills, it sure did, but it also helped us understand how to pace those uphills and hold back. And I think the biggest thing that we see people do is just smash the uphills way too hard early and then really, really burn out later. One other thing I would add to this is you do want a big cassette on your TT bike. A lot of standard cassettes that come with a TT bike might be something like a 28, and you're going to be just grinding at such a low cadence that muscularly your legs are going to be destroyed. So if you can get a bigger cassette, that makes it easier to kind of spin up the hills. Something like a 32 or a 34 would be great. If you don't know what that means, just take your bike to your local bike shop, tell them that you're doing Ironman Lake Placid and that you need a cassette that works for really big, long climbs.
Okay, I'm getting ready for Lake Placid, and I have a choice for my long runs race. Even my supporting runs are Monday through Friday. Should I be focusing on speed work, or should I be focusing on sort of strength, sort of hill work? What do you recommend, Kevin?
Yeah. Obviously, if you can, I think hills are the best thing you can do as a runner, especially if you're doing this course. So prioritize hills for sure, especially on your bricks. We did that one last year in the Valley where we did the 100-mile bike or 112-mile bike. And then we did, I think, 6 or 7 miles off the bike, and it was straight uphill. We ran like 600, 700 feet in the first 4 miles, and that helped a lot. We were white, but we knew that we were going to be ready. So prioritize hills. If you live somewhere flat, bridges are always a good option. If you're in the city, you can do bridges and stuff. It'll help a little bit, but definitely prioritize hills when you can.
And I think something to add to that is you want to be familiar with something that's more of a sustainable effort than a sustainable pace, just because your pace is going to be kind of variable going up Lisa G's hill versus going down. And so think about what is that heart rate that I can sustain, or even just that feel, because it's not the same as running 26 miles on flat ground.
Yeah, I think in all these long distance races, we're always thinking about, effort. So we're sort of saying to ourselves, what is sustainable, right? And asking yourself. And so regardless of what maybe your threshold says, or in training peaks, or maybe what you've even done on some of your bricks, you're always saying to yourself, is this sustainable for my race distance? Yeah. And talk about, let's talk a little bit about bike volume. We love bike volume here at the Endurance Tribe. Why is that important?
So I think bike volume in general is important because, again, you have to run a marathon after doing an 112-mile ride, which means you need to figure out how to make 112 miles feel easy. And in order to do that, you're going to need to ride really, really long a lot of the time. So we have most of our athletes, and I think our training plan for this was probably starting week 12, week 10. As soon as we could get outside in the spring, we were doing weekends with 4, 5, 6-hour rides pretty much every weekend, unless it was more of a recovery week. And I found that was great because, when you're starting a training plan like this, it's January, your Zwift rides might be 40 miles and that's about it. It seems really intimidating to look at that huge distance. But by the time we showed up at Placid, it was not intimidating to think about that long riding, and we knew exactly what our all-day pace was. So I wouldn't say the bike at the race is ever going to be easy, but you want that to not feel daunting, and you don't really want to feel that fatigue set in until that mile 90, 95 mark, which is usually where we see it.
All right. So those are some of our key workouts. I hope those are helpful for folks. And if you guys have any questions, just reach out to us. We're always happy to help. We love this race. And we want to sort of begin to wrap up here. It's why should we be doing Lake Placid? Kevin, why should I come over and see all your family and do this crazy race?
Yeah, I'm a little bit biased. I've said this before. It's the best. I think it's the best race in North America for sure. The crowd and energy is amazing. It's a historic town. There's a reason why it's been going on for 27 years now. It's the most tenured race besides for Hawaii. So there's a reason for that. And then, July is a good time. The climate is similar to what you're training with in the Northeast. You have June and the beginning of July to kind of get that heat acclimation. So it's not you're getting shocked in May where you're going like this hot race like you guys did in St. George's. So it's a good timing race too. And I'll say again, it's special. I think it holds its legs with, some of the famous European ones like Switzerland and some of those ones. So, and like I said earlier, it's a vacation too. If you have a family, bring them, they're going to love it. You can sightsee, there's great restaurants. You can go to playas with a big group and have fun like we do. Yeah, it's the best one out there.
And there's probably always some reason to sort of exercise maybe caution when you sign up for an Ironman, and maybe even caution when signing up for Ironman Lake Placid. Katie, what should we be thinking about? So we say, should I do this? Should I not do this? What's the conversation you're having with some of your athletes around this?
Yeah, so I think Ironman Lake Placid, we did this as our first Ironman, but it is not necessarily what I would call a beginner-friendly Ironman. So if your only goal ever is to finish an Ironman and you want it to be on the easier end of the spectrum, it might not be Placid because it is so hilly. And if you can't train on hills, I would say that Ironman Lake Placid is going to be really, really hard. A lot of people are coming from areas that are flatter or they do most of their training inside. And again, you can simulate elements of that, but you need to know what it's like to climb 1,000 feet, descend 1,000 feet back and forth, kind of like what you see in Placid. So keep that in mind for selecting that first Ironman. Another reason to maybe not do Placid is that lodging can be really, really expensive there. So it's probably not the most affordable. There are other Ironmans that are in areas where it can be cheaper to get lodging. Like when we did St. George, I mean, that's a totally brutal course, but the lodging was pretty cheap. So it kind of, you're gonna have to put that into your calculation. And as we know, Ironman is really expensive. And most places in Placid have like a 1 week minimum and you're gonna be spending like several $1,000s on your lodging because we can't all stay in Kevin's basement, unfortunately. And then keep in mind too, that lodging is gonna sell out really early. So you wanna be proactive as soon as you register. If you're registering in August of 2024 for a race in 2025, you need to be looking into lodging right now as well. And then final point is, this is not a reason to not do Ironman Lake Placid, but just a point on Ironmans in general. It's really valuable to maybe not start with Ironman. Kevin is an anomaly. He did awesome. Wow. Some people can just roll into this and absolutely crush it. But I would say in general, it's valuable to get in 2 or 3 seasons of shorter races, learn about triathlon, build a ton of durability, and then sign up for the big one, just because there's a lot to learn just from triathlon in general. And it's a really big jump to go into an Ironman training plan as well as completing that distance.
Yeah, it's a beast of course for sure.
And also related to that, we get a lot of questions that I'm interested to hear you guys take on this. But people say, well, can I do a 70.3 to get ready for Ironman? Or if people say, oh, should I run a marathon to get ready for an Ironman? And I guess the answer is sort of yes and no. It's all, in terms of yes, it's always good. Half Ironman will provide you with some long distance triathlon experience. But I think what's important is that even though Ironman is twice the distance, it's my feeling it's, 3x to 4x harder than a half Ironman. I think of half Ironman as much closer to an Olympic distance race on the spectrum. And then Ironman sits way off on the other side. So yes, it is good prep, but you're really not going to approximate the demands of an Ironman. If you want to be good at Ironman, you just have to do Ironman.
I agree.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Okay, wow. This was amazing. So much here. I hope you guys got a lot out of this. I know that it was fun for me to hear all the stories and all the tips and tricks. We are going to wrap here today with our gear pick of the week. We can never skip gear pick of the week. So Katie, do you want to go ahead?
I would love to go with gear pick of the week. So if you do Ironman Lake Placid or any Ironman, or if you just run 5Ks, you probably have some sore muscles. My gear pick of the week is a Hypervolt massage gun with their new heated head attachment. So the Hypervolt is this sort of massage gun that is really great for just working out some of the kinks and muscles. And they have a new attachment that's heated. So you get that heat on top of some of that pounding. And I find that it's really nice. I can do it, calves, quads, upper back. Again, we know that at the end of the day, the best tools for recovery are sleep and nutrition, but it's sometimes nice to have fun gadgets as well. And this one is one of my favorites. So we'll drop that link in our extended show notes.
Awesome. Okay, my gear pick of the week, and don't give me grief, guys, but I'm going to go with the Roka Sim shorts. And so with the caveat here, so I don't recommend Roka Sim shorts for necessarily learning how to swim because they can be a little bit of a crutch, although we can have that conversation there. There is a nuance there. But mostly I'm recommending it because as the water begins to warm and you get into open water, I like to wear my Roka Sim shorts when it's too hot for a wetsuit. And so I use my Roka Sim shorts to give it a buoyancy. And then also with the swim buoy, I feel just a little bit more comfortable in open water. So I'm recommending the Roka Sim shorts, not for the pool, but for open water when the water warms.
Jim, I'm only giving you a free pass on the sim shorts because you broke your femur. So
that's it.
So
If you said this last year, it's a different story there.
Kevin, gear pick of the week.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple. I'm going to go with just a foam roller and a small rubber band. Something I've been doing a lot before my morning runs is just rolling my back out. Like you wake up a little bit tight. So I roll my back out, roll the hammies out. I do that in the morning. And then obviously at night when I do my static stretching, I'll also bring it out. But yeah, I've been loving the foam roller and the band just for some calf stretches and quads and ankle flexibility there as well.
Great. Well, thanks, coaches. This has been amazing. And again, I'll remind you that if you found this useful, please give us a review or give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you guys are awesome. I love anytime I get to chat with you guys. So we'll have to do it in person next time.
Yes, we will. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.